Hi.
Hello there. In the last segment, Adolph Saphir has been thinking about and pointing to the various appearances of God in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something as witnesses we didn't think about very much. So we're so stuck on the idea that God can't be seen and never has been seen. We cling to John 1:18 for
Mm-hmm.
that idea that we forget that to say we can't see God is not to say God can't appear.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously God did appear, and this was fixed in the minds of the Jews by the book of Genesis, and then
Mm-hmm.
multiple appearances throughout the rest of the
Yeah.
Old Testament. So why is this again God taking a chance though? Because when God appears, what will generally happen is you'll
Yeah.
make an idol of the appearance.
Yeah. So I think that is why you find in the accounts he doesn't appear the same way all the time.
Mm.
So you've got him appearing as a man
In Genesis, yeah.
in Genesis. You've got him appearing in a burning bush or a fiery mountain.
Mm-hmm. In Exodus,
Yeah.
that comes second.
Yeah. So I think this would break down the ability to be able to make an image in what you think is the likeness of God.
The likeness of God, yeah.
Yeah, and I found the same thing in Jesus' miracles. The point was made, I think, in one of the commentaries, that he never does it the same way. So you've got him curing people, but then in another account, same kind of illness, he cures, but in a different way. So sometimes he just says it, nothing. Sometimes he spits and makes a mud and puts it in the person's eyes, or
Sometimes lays hands on, but
yeah,
sometimes does it from a distance.
yeah. So there's no formula that
Mm.
you can base anything on in the future. So he knows our tendencies, that we get stuck and we want things exactly one way
We
only.
could call it the God in the box tendency.
Mm,
That's exactly what happened with the temple. It was approved of God, but turned into an idol ultimately.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're going to open up what Saphir's discussion of the continuity of the Bible. I think this next section is on how the books all connect to each other.
Okay. Let me, for a few moments, remind you of the historical books as they are given to us, and of the unity which they form. There are first the 5 books of Moses, upon which the whole building rests, and these 5 books of Moses are inseparable. Exodus shows how God redeemed Israel out of Egypt and brought Israel to himself. Leviticus shows us how this redeemed nation was sanctified to God by the institution of the priesthood, of the sacrifices, and of the festivals. Numbers shows us how this nation was disciplined in the wilderness, and the utter failure of the nation to accomplish their destiny in the person of Aaron, even in the person of Moses himself, who on account of his sin, because he did not fully represent the character of God, was excluded from entrance into the land of Canaan. Now it is impossible that the history could conclude with the book of Numbers, because then it would conclude, as it were, with sunset, in the darkness of despondency. Therefore, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses appears as a prophet, showing the loving kindness of the Lord, and how, notwithstanding all the unfaithfulness of Israel and his own imperfection and sin, God would carry out his plan. Immediately after the book of Deuteronomy, there comes the book of Joshua, which is joined to the book of Deuteronomy by the conjunction and.
As the book of Joshua joins Deuteronomy by and, so the book of the Judges joins the book of Joshua by saying, and after the death of Joshua. Another and. Judges and the 2 books of Samuel are connected together in the same way. For in the book of Samuel, Samuel is represented as judging Israel. He was, as it were, the last of the judges, and the connecting link with David. The 2 books of Samuel, And I think we should note that they're one in the Hebrew text, right? One book. And Kings. And the two books of Kings, also one in the Hebrew, are so blended and joined together that in the Septuagint, that is the Greek version, they are called the four books of Samuel. And they bring the history of Israel down to the captivity, concluding with a gleam of hope and sunshine. Now, to supplement this history, there is another book of history given to us, the object of which is to show how, after the Babylonish captivity, God's people were restored to their own land, and the temple service and the priesthood were revived. Now, he's talking about Chronicles, which is, again, one book in the Hebrew. And in order to bring this clearly before us, it was necessary to give again the genealogies of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their children, and to connect them with the beginning. So the book of Chronicles begins with Adam, showing us the genealogies as they follow.
But as the second book of Chronicles ends by telling us how Cyrus gave permission to the Jews to return to their own land, the identical two verses open the book of Ezra, and in Ezra and Nehemiah we have an account of what formed the beginning of the new period of Israel's history. So all these books are united and compacted together, and all have one object in view. And what is important to that object is narrated, and what is not important to that object is omitted, however important it may appear to the eyes of the mere secular or world historian. But Exodus would have no meaning unless it was preceded by the book of Genesis. For who were this people that Moses was called to bring out of Egypt? Who was Abraham? Who was Isaac? And who was Jacob, the God of whom appears to Moses and gives to him that wonderful commission? It is therefore necessary that there should precede the book of Exodus a book to explain all this. And so we have not merely the history of the patriarchs and the history of Joseph, by whom the transition was made from Canaan into Egypt, but to understand Abraham aright and the God of Abraham, it was necessary also to have the history of the creation of the world, of Adam and of Noah, and of the promises which were given to the fathers. Therefore, Genesis is the necessary prologue to the three middle books of the Pentateuch, as the book of Deuteronomy is the epilogue.
Now look at the first three chapters of the book of Genesis. They form a complete whole. God, the creator of heaven and of earth, man created in the image of God as the culminating point of God's creation, the Sabbath instituted, paradise described, Eve formed out of Adam, sin introduced by an adverse spiritual power, the consequences of sin, death, spiritual, temporal, and everlasting. The immediate result of sin, the conscience acting in man and accusing him, so that he is ashamed and is afraid. The intervention of God in his great mercy and love, revealing the deliverance that would be brought through the seed of the woman, by one that was to suffer, and also describing the period which was now to commence, when the judgment was to be blended with mercy, the period of chastisement, when man, through a severe discipline, was to learn the meaning of life and was to be exercised unto godliness. Then there was the manifestation of God himself at the entrance of paradise. Now we find that the descendants of Adam, as Adam and Eve themselves, understood this teaching. They had faith in God and the Creator, omnipotent, all-wise, all-loving, merciful, and compassionate to them. They knew that the wages of sin was death. They knew that finally there was to come a deliverer who by his own sufferings was to gain the victory over death and over him that had the power of death. They worshiped God in the way in which he had appointed, talking, of course, of the sacrificial system, which they seem to have known from the very beginning. They relied upon the promise, as we can see from the words of Eve at the birth of Cain, and from what Lamech said at the birth of Noah. So they believed, they hoped, they prayed, and they served God. there must have been a manifestation of the presence of the Lord, identified with some particular place, as we read that Cain fled from before the presence of the Lord. Yeah, we missed that one completely, don't we? The face of Jehovah in some Bibles. So I like the fact that he talks about Exodus and the sequence, Exodus coming after Genesis, to put the concept that troubles so many people today, the chosen people idea, to put it in a context of all history, creation and subsequent history of the race. There was a need for God to elect a people to be not just the people that receive the benefits, but pass on the benefits to others, the whole human race. Genesis
so they
12,
fulfill a purpose for the ultimate good of all mankind.
Yeah.
So it's not favoritism. It's a plan that works out to benefit everyone.
Yeah. So the sequence of the Bible is all important. It doesn't start with Exodus. It starts with creation and all men being made in the image of God.
Yeah.
So we're going to link the video we did on one of 2 or 3 videos on Cain and Abel. And what we learned from that was, first, Cain was not disfellowshipped after not only he didn't offer pure worship according to the logic of Jehovah's Witnesses, but he murdered his brother. He still wasn't disfellowshipped by Jehovah, who talked to him.
He still gets grace.
And the Saphir points out here, Cain fled from the presence of Jehovah. So what does that mean, the presence of Jehovah? What did he have to flee from? Apparently a manifestation or a epiphany of God.
Yeah, you don't hide from a booming voice from the sky.
Yeah, so that's the link. Cain was neither DF'd, and even then God talked to him after he murdered his brother and offered unacceptable sacrifices. So,
Yeah.
what a lesson. See you soon.